thank you for taking time to come here today, or maybe more this evening. I think it's better to say that. And yeah, today I will speak about Angular and the new features in Angular. So first my talk was about go deeping in signals, which is a big part of the renaissance of Angular. But finally, after discussion with Vasilika, I changed my mind and just give you some, the main features about Angular since Angular 14. So we will see why Angular create a renaissance and what, of course. So as Vasilika told you, I'm Nicolas Frizzarin. I'm a Gold developer expert in web technologies, more especially in UI and DevTools and performance, and also in Angular. And last year I was nominated for become Microsoft Most Valuable Professional in DevTools. And I work as developer advocate and senior staff engineer at Sfeir. And my friends and colleagues is here because I work in Lombard International Assurance as a web architect. So what's the plan for these talks? First, we will see standalone components, why we decided to create standalone components and how to import it easily in our project. Finally, we will see how we could create composition API. This is the best way for me to reuse code. And we will finally see signals, which improves the reactivity of Angular, for finally to give you some other cool stuff, because there are secondary useful features, but it's not the main features. And if we have a lot of, and if you have a bit time, I could code you something with the new features of Angular in application. So first, standalone components. Standalone components begin with a RFC created by Paweł Kozłowski, which is a team member of Angular, and he said, given the central role of ng modules in Angular, it's hard to reason about components, pipe, and directive, and I think that's totally right, because who works with React here? Okay, who works with Vue.js here? Okay, so in React and Vue.js, it's quite easy to create component. You create component and you can import it in all your projects. It's just an import, easy. Okay, but in Angular, it was a little bit more complicated. You have to create a component, okay, and then you have to import it in a module and declare it in a module. And then you have to import the module that export this component to use the components. So yeah, the logic to create a component and to use it is quite tricky if you want to use your components in your whole application, right? So that's the main point. And the second point was, other thing which is very important is that some people that create Angular library have a background with React and Vue.js, so the system of modules was quite complicated to understand for them. So that's why what the standard components will solve. First, when we create the hello world is too much complicated. You have to understand the modules, you have to understand how bootstrap the application, you have to understand what is a component. So for new joiners, and it's too complicated to understand. Then imagine, because components depends of modules, maybe reading the component is not enough on its own to just understand all the logic of the components. So maybe you have to switch in another module that expose another component to understand what your first components really do. And then, the bootstrapping is too much complex, because you have to bootstrap in the modules, and in these modules you have a specific property, which is bootstrapping property that expose the components on which the application have to start. So yeah. Bootstrapping is also too complex. 4 files, the modules, the index.html file, the main.ts, and the components on itself, just to display a hello world. It's too much. It's too much. So now it's easy to write a standard component. So this code works before Angular 19, so the last version of Angular. Now standalone property is optional, because all the components are standalone by default in Angular. So, but before the 19 versions, you have to specify the standalone property to true, and if you do that, you have the right to use the imports property. This imports property is really important because in this property you have to specify all the dependencies of your components, okay? And in this property you have to import just modules or standalone components or standalone directives, standalone pipes, anything else, but you have to import standalones or modules. So create standalone components have several impacts in the whole ecosystem of Angular. The first impact was on the routing, how to navigate on the standalone components. Can we lazy load the standalone components? Can we lazy load the sets of standalone components? Do we have some regression, maybe? Then bootstrapping is impacted. Can we bootstrap on the standalone components? How to register global providers in an app without modules? Injector, new scope of injector. Okay, because if you have no more modules, the module injectors doesn't make sense anymore. So yeah, we have new scope called environment injector, which is the priority of the injector between the module injector and the environment injector. A lot of questions. And we will see that, don't worry. So first, routing, there are a lot of possibilities. So to navigate to standalone components, it's very easy. You can do that as you can do before, of course. So, sorry. So path, you specify your path, and then in components, this property can take a standalone components, or this property can take just a component, a classic components. Okay. If you want to lazy load a standalone components, it's exactly the same syntax as we do for load children with modules. So load components, this property take a nothing function which return a promise, an observable of component, of course. So here I import my hello details components. Okay, I lazy load my standalone hello details components, and of course, if I want lazy load a set of standalone components, it's also possible. It's exactly the same syntax of the load children, except that instead of exported a module, you have just to have to export a root configuration. Okay, this root configuration can be a variable, right? So yeah, bootstrapping now. So it's easy now to bootstrap on your application. Just call the function bootstrap application, give your app components, which is standalone components, okay, and then you have to specify if you want a list of providers that the whole application needs or want to use, okay. So here I provide the router, I provide animation, I provide the HTTP clients, I specify I want to use the HTTP client with interceptors, and I give a list of my interceptors. And if you want to use some modules that are not totally migrate in the new ecosystem of Angular, you have a specific function, import providers from. You give the modules, and this function will extract all the providers of this module and expose it to the root injector. So the whole application can use the mat dialog service now, just with one line. So it's quite easy. So let's talk about environment injector. So as I explained, now in Angular, before standalone ecosystems, we have the root injector, the module injector, and the element injector. Element injector was when you provide a specific providers for specific components. Okay. Module injector is when you provide some injection, some providers for a specific modules. Okay. And you have the root injector, which is the injector of the application. So when you register a provider in the root injector, the whole application can have access to this provider. So how to create environment injector? It's quite easy. Now we have a new property when you declare when you create a routing. So you have the providers property, which takes an array of providers, and at this moment the user service provider can be used in the components, and in the component loading in components, and in the details components. Okay, and only on those two components. Okay. So how works the bubbling? Quite easy. you have the component injector. So what will happen now? Imagine you want to retrieve a token of a provider. So first he will check in the elements injector, so the component injector. If he doesn't find the token, he go to the module injector. If he doesn't find in the module, he go to the environment. He doesn't find the environment, he go to the root. Okay? And if he doesn't find in the root, he said, sorry, your token doesn't exist. Is it okay for everybody? No? Yeah? Okay. Yeah.
Question, no?
Yeah, you can have a question if you want.
Can you go to the last previous slide?
Yeah.
I remember that bubbling, it was not very good, no? That it was something like when it goes through the whole tree of your application that it's not good, or it's not related to this?
No, it's not related to
Not
this.
related to
No.
injection. Okay.
No.
Yeah.
Other question about that? No? So if you want to go, if you want to create, maybe everybody sees something here? No.
No.
Right? Okay.
Can you scroll maybe? No?
I changed my terminal, so it's a little bit complicated. Oh, okay.
I think you can use here this Control B. Open.
Everybody
Oh,
sees
God.
something?
Vim user?
Yeah, try. I got this just. Yeah, I take my whole weekend just to try Neovim and have completion, something like this. So yeah, just I'm trying. I like when it's quite complicated. So yeah, if I go to the component here, I create a specific provider, you know, which is provided in the root injector. Okay, is it okay for everybody? Yeah. So yeah. So now imagine I want to create a specific provider just for one component, right? So that's what I said. So so I create a provider and I don't need that, right?
Nico, can you put the font a little bit bigger? Or?
Yeah.
Great, merci.
That's cool for me. So I will say hello, which sorry I miss a problem. This is not it is return a string, right? And what I could do is just okay. So now I have this, so I can now go to my app components. That's my test to check when this weekend if all was correctly parameters. I know. So this is not needed anymore, to be honest. Okay, this need because let me just check if I'm in the correct version of Angular. So no, I'm in version that's why I prepare my demo. No. Okay. So here I need the property standalone to true, and here I register my services in the elements injector. So to do that, okay, here I will inject my services. And okay, so this will work. No, because I made
Comma.
an error. True. So let's take a look if it works as expected, right? Okay. And so it worked, and we have high hold, so it's okay, it works, right? So what we see here, if we take a look about the code, I will just no, it's here. So first, I create a app service classes, right, which is an injectable, and then instead of register it in the root injector, I just register it in the components. So at this moment, my components can have access to the app service, right? Now imagine if I go to, now I remove this part, okay, and I relaunch my application. If I go now and I inspect, not this way. What we see is an injector error because if we take a look, we have this error. So this error says it doesn't find the token for the correct app service because the app service is not providing in any components or any injector level. It's okay? Yeah? So let's continue. So let's talk about the composition API. So before Angular 14, the world was very sad for Angular because we can't use the composition API, okay? Because all the logic of Angular normally is on specific providers, okay? We don't have business logic in components. We have business logic in provider. So if we can inject a provider outside the injection context, it will be complicated to associate some part of the business, okay? So if we do that before Angular 14, it doesn't work, okay? Because you are outside of injection context. Since Angular 14, it's now possible to inject a provider outside an injection context. So it's easy to compose your business logic. Okay, so the power of using the inject function outside an injection context can unblock a lot of things. First, it will unblock the composition helper API, so you can create high reusable code. Now, guards interceptors is not needed to be declared in class. We can just create function. And finally, interceptor can also become a function. So that's a composition helper you can create. So imagine you have to retrieve the parameters in Angular. It's always the same thing. Okay, first you have to inject the affiliated routes. Thanks to the property params map, which return an observable, you can retrieve all the parameters and do what you want with RxJS operators. So what I do here is I inject my affiliated routes, I retrieve my params, and I send my params only if they are defined. So when I create that, I can, in my components, use get params, and it's easy because at this moment inject will be worked as expected. Okay, because now inject can be used outside injection context. Is it okay? Yeah. Okay, so is it possible to inject providers at runtime? So yeah, it's totally possible. So first you have to inject the injector of your components. Okay. To retrieve the injector, that's what I did here. So this line lets you to retrieve the injector of the components, and then I use a specific function which is running injection context, and in this function I specify the injector in which I want to inject my specific token with app service here. Okay, just keep in mind that your function here can't be asynchronous. Okay, it must to be a synchronous function, so no async, no promise. So guard as function, this is a guard declared with a class. So you have a class, I create a pattern, and this guard lets you just to check if the ID of the URL match this pattern. If it's the case, we go to the roots. If we go to the URL, and if it's not the case, we return to the home page. Okay, so this can be replaced now by this. So it's exactly the same things, at the exception that I didn't create a class. I didn't use the @injectable annotation. Okay, and but the logic doesn't change. Okay. You can do exactly the same for interceptor. So in this interceptor, I create a class which is preceded by the annotation @injectable. I implement the HTTP interceptor. When you implement the HTTP interceptor, you have to implement the intercept function. This function takes in parameters the request and the next, which is the HTTP handler. And here I clone my requests. When I clone my request, I add a new headers called authorization. I set this authorization to Sfeir, and I send my request to the network. Right? If you want to improve this code with a function, it's exactly the same. Okay, the business doesn't change, except that you don't use @injectable annotation, you don't use a class, and the next, which is the HTTP handler, now is just a function, so it's not need to use handle to send the request to the network. Just use next, which is function, and give in parameters your function, your request, clone request. How to register interceptor? So if you use a class interceptor, it's quite easy. You just have to use provide HTTP clients with interceptors from DI, okay, and it's finished. And if you want to use function as interceptors, you have to provide HTTP clients and use HTTP client function, which is interceptors, which take in first arguments an array of all your function interceptors. That's quite easy. Problems with composition also is when you create specific UI library. Okay, you you want to associate maybe I don't know, you have a class component for buttons and you want to associate this class for other directive. Okay, so this is a good pattern, but there is some problems. So generally a class can extend just one class. It can't extend two classes. It's not possible. So if you want to extend two classes, you have to extend one class, and in this one class extended, you have extend another class, and yeah, it's complicated. So what you have to what you create here, it's mixing. Okay, and mixing is not a good pattern, to be honest, and that's why it will be removed in CSS. It's not a good idea, so that's why in CSS you have, you know, now layers like this. You know, do you know layers in CSS? That's why we created layers. So yeah, so directive composition, now it's quite easy. You have a host directive property for directive. So this directive extends the base Sfeir buttons directive, which is a standalone directive. And in this directive, I exposed the color input. So my base Sfeir button directive have an input called color, but here I expose the color input and I rename it type. Okay, so by default, all the inputs in base Sfeir buttons are not exposed as the output as well. Okay, so you have to specify which inputs and which outputs are exposed in inputs and outputs property. Okay, of course you can retrieve the instance of the base Sfeir buttons thanks to adult child or adult children annotation. So let's go to signals and reactivity grain. So okay, so signals it's a large topic, to be honest. It could be just one talk or maybe one day of a big workshop. So I will just give you why we create signals, right? Okay, what we are proud of signals, it's lazy evaluation, resurgence, and integration. Why we create signals? So the problem with Angular is performance. And performance is due to change detection in any frameworks. Okay, it could be in React, it could be in Vue, it could be in Angular. Like that, if you take a look at React 19, now by default all the components are memorized. Okay, that's a good idea, because the goal when what is complicated to do with change detection is just to say to the view, okay, just this part needs to be refreshed. Okay, so before that, Angular refreshed all the time all the page. Okay, so if you have a big tree, he refresh all the tree each time something change. Okay.
And how quick works?
No, quick is resumability. So it's more it's not client-side rendering in quick. It's server-side rendering, and which is quick. What do quick is just to send to the HTML all the necessary information to retrieve a specific part when you click on a specific buttons. At this moment, you call a function. You have a global event handler which listen this click, and when you call this click, you call a specific chunk, and when the chunk is downloaded, you apply the function of the chunk. Okay, here we are talking about just refresh a specific parts of an element of a page. So that's why we create signals. We create signals to have grain in detection. Okay. So how works signals? So signals is based on a pull system. Okay, so it's quite easy to be understood. It's like GitHub when you push and when you pull code. Okay, so just imagine. So I create a counter to create a signal. It's quite easy. You just use signals function with initial value. So here I use the counter. I create counter. This counter is a signals, and the initial value of the signals is 0. Then I create a isEven computed function. So this computed function will be reevaluated each time the counter change. Okay. So and I check if it returns true or false, okay, and have an effect, and this effect we will enter in this effect each time the is-even change, okay, and we check if it's true we return even, if it's false we return odd. Okay, now I set 1, okay, so if I set 1, so my value first is 1, okay, and now I set 2. So my valuation is 1, my value is 1, I set 2, so I push a new version of my value in counter, right? We are here, it's okay? So here, the value version is increment to 1, so we have 2, the value is 2 because I set 2, okay, and I push is-even, I push a value, and the is-even is notified that the value change, okay? So first, the value version was 1, value 1. Now, the producer, it will produce value false, okay? And then you go to the effect part, okay? In the effect part, we will enter in the effect part, it check, before 1 it was false, now it's true. So we are here, and he will produce a new value, okay, because the event change, right? And then we pull in the counter, and here now we have 2. So that's the main system of how worked signers. It's quite complicated. I know this is not totally clear in reactivity, but what you have to understand is that when the signer change you enter in the computed function, okay, this computed function will will do some business logic to check if it's even or not, and when is even, because is even is a reactivity dependency of effects. Each time the is even change, you enter in the effect. Okay, is it clear for everybody? Yeah. So what's important to know is that's the awesome part of that's the awesome part of signers. If now imagine you have counter set you set the counter to 2, okay, and just after that you set the counter to 4. So what will happen here is, okay, your counter will increment, but the is-even function will not create a new value, okay, because first with 2 it returns true, and with 4 it returns also true, right? So at this moment the is-even doesn't push something because it's not really evaluated, and you don't enter in your effect, okay, because your interface will not change, right? Okay, so this can be done like so. In this example, I just create an effect. Okay, I fetch which fetch to do. So each time my ID change, I make a call to retrieve the details of the to do. Okay, I set my response.json, and of course, before Angular 19, you have to specify allow seen as write to true to make possible to set a to-do, but now it's not needed anymore. We can just remove it to work without that, but I think it's not a good idea to set specific signers in effect. Okay, that's a bad practice, to be honest, but now we have a lot of things new, so you can avoid to do that. But before Angular 19, you don't have the choice to do that. Okay, and you have this function, this effect function, take a cleanup function, and in this cleanup function you can do all what you want. So each time the ID change, my first request, if is pending, is cancelled to have a new request. So signer components, so that's the best part of signers. All the annotation, you know, like at input, at output, at content child, at view child will be replaced by a signer function. So at input will be replaced by input, at output will be replaced by output function, view at view child will be replaced by view child function, and the other parts will be also replaced. So other cool stuff of Angular. First, required inputs. So you can specify your required, okay? And if you use the input function, you can just use input.required. It worked. So that's cool. So now no more ngIf in your component to check if the input is required or not. No more lifecycle, no more complicated selector. Okay. Input transformation, so you can transform your inputs. That's really nice. Okay. Honestly, Angular gives you a lot of transformation function out of the box, like Boolean attributes. So this function take your input and transform it to a Boolean. Okay, so if you pass true in string characters, you will return true in Boolean. Okay, so no more setter and getter to transform, and no more custom decorator to transform. That's very nice. We don't use Webpack anymore. We use Vite and ES build for the production build. And for the win, now all the forms are typed, no empty constructor and enjoying its lifecycle when you create a new component. Cannot guard is now deprecated and removed in 19 in favor of can match. Okay, so can match is a guard that is called before the navigation. Okay, so you always enter in a can match hook. And finally, partial iteration instead of destructive iteration. So if you create server-side application with Angular, before all the DOM will be destroyed to recreate one dynamic. So now it's not the case anymore. We will use partial iteration based on the architecture island. So just only the part that needs to be interactive will be refreshed. Okay. What's next for the future? So this is already the case. You have a built-in flow control. So now it's not needed anymore to have ngIf and J4 and the switch. You can use @if, @else, @switch, @for, like you know in Svelte. Okay. So this lets you to be very close to the JavaScript, syntax, and I think it's better for new joiner because learning curve will be more easy to understand.
Because before it was like an HTML element.
Yeah, before
and
it was
now
just
it's JavaScript.
a specific directive like ngIf with a super syntax. So it was quite complicated. You have to understand what is structural directive. So now, just to construct correctly, structure correctly your DOM, just @if, so you are more close to the JavaScript syntax. You can differ templating, so each time to differ. So of course the core web vitals will be improved, the cumulative shift and LCP will be improved. So these components will be created in a specific chunk. It will not be initially loaded in the initial chunk. Okay, and these components will be displayed only when you click on a specific button called load button. Okay, so that's what it is. So when you click on the load button, you will download the my components and display it. Okay, before you click on the load button, you will display the data display before the load. Okay, during the network process, so during the downloading of your my components, you will display the loading parts. Okay, and if you have an error during the downloading, so maybe I don't know, network broken or something like this, you will enter in the @error block. Okay, thank you very much. You can follow me on Twitter and LinkedIn. You can ask all the questions you want. It will be a pleasure to help you in your development of Angular. And that's all.
Thank you very much.